4:11 a.m. Omaha, Nebraska. November 14th, 2025. The alley behind a duplex on Calder Court ran dark and narrow between two rows of backyard fences. No streetlights. A federal entry team of 22 agents and officers stacked at the rear foundation wall, bodies pressed flat, breathing controlled. Two ram operators held the Halligan bars. Nobody moved. Then the radio clicked twice. Both units breached simultaneously, front and rear. The rear team hit the kitchen door in under 3 seconds. Forward momentum carried them toward the basement stairwell, where utility records and license plate analysis from 95 days of surveillance suggested something had been running continuously, drawing 3 times the electrical load of any neighboring property on the block. What they found behind a drywall panel at the bottom of those stairs would anchor a federal indictment spanning 4 states, 19 co-conspirators, and 20 young women whose families had spent months filing missing person reports that no one initially connected to each other. This is the reconstruction of Operation Blackline. The story does not begin in that alley. It begins 8 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday morning in late September 2025, inside a payroll department in a low-rise office building on the eastern edge of downtown Omaha. Her name, for the purposes of this account, is Dana Marsh. Payroll compliance clerk. 12 years at Heartland Staffing Solutions, a licensed home health placement agency that supplied certified nursing aides and caregiver staff to facilities across the Central Plains. Dana processed employment verifications, cross-checked federal tax identification numbers, and flagged discrepancies in submitted documentation. She was methodical. She was not easily surprised. On September 23, 2025, she was surprised. A pay stub arrived by fax, an older document submission method that still turned up occasionally from smaller rural employers. The stub listed Heartland Staffing Solutions as the issuing company. It listed the company's federal employer identification number correctly. The routing and formatting looked, at a glance, entirely legitimate. Dana had never issued that stub. The employee named on it did not appear in any Heartland payroll record. The job title listed, Residential Care Liaison, was not a position Heartland had ever used. And the EIN, the number that tied the document to Heartland as a federal tax entity, had been lifted verbatim from Heartland's publicly filed business records. Someone had built a fake pay stub using a real company's credentials and faxed it to the actual company whose identity they had stolen. Dana stared at the document for approximately 90 seconds. Then she called the Omaha field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. What strikes us about this case is how ordinary the entry point was. Not a wiretap, not a cartel informant, a fax. A payroll clerk who had spent 12 years developing an instinct for documents that didn't belong. The entire architecture of a 95-day recruiter pipeline, traced across Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, and Missouri, cracked open because Dana Marsh noticed a number on a piece of paper that shouldn't have existed. The FBI field office assigned the complaint to Special Agent Karen Doyle, a financial crimes investigator with 11 years of experience in fraud and labor exploitation cases. Doyle requested a copy of the stub, confirmed the identity theft, and pulled the fax's originating number. The number traced to a prepaid line, already inactive. Technically a dead end, but Doyle kept the file open. 3 days later, Dana called again. A second stub had arrived. Same format. Different employee name. Same EIN. This time, the address listed was a street number in Council Bluffs, Iowa, directly across the Missouri River from Omaha. Doyle pulled the Council Bluffs address. It was a mailbox at a shipping center. The mailbox was rented under a limited liability company called Midwest Home Resource Group. The LLC had been registered in Delaware 11 months earlier, listing a registered agent in Wilmington. Its stated business purpose: home health staffing services. The LLC had no licensed nurses on file with the Nebraska Department of Health, no certified aides, no insurance bonds required for licensed home care agencies, but it had a federal EIN, a business checking account at a regional bank, and a mailing address 1 block from a residential neighborhood in West Omaha. Doyle called the county assessor's office. The mailing address corresponded to a duplex on Calder Court, a quiet, maple-lined street of post-war frame houses 8 miles from the Missouri River. The duplex had been rented 11 months earlier under the name of Midwest Home Resource Group. Monthly rent paid on time, by money order. The property manager remembered one thing clearly: he had never met anyone at the property. The application had come in by mail. The deposit had arrived by money order. When he drove by to check on the unit, the windows had been covered from the inside with dark paper, and no lights were visible from the street. I spent hours going through the case file documentation, and one detail kept returning. The property manager said the duplex always smelled faintly of electrical heat when he walked past the exterior foundation vents. He mentioned it to no one because he assumed it was an old furnace running inefficiently. It was not the furnace. By early October 2025, Doyle had a shell company, a rented duplex, a stolen employer identity, and 2 fake pay stubs sent to women's families in rural towns. She did not yet know why the pay stubs existed. The answer came from a missing person database cross-reference that took a federal analyst 48 hours to complete. The FBI's National Crime Information Center, cross-referenced against state-level missing person records in Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, and Missouri, returned something unexpected. Over the prior 4 months, 23 young women between the ages of 22 and 27 had been reported missing from small towns across those 4 states. The reports had been filed with different county sheriffs, different municipal police departments, different state agencies. None of them had been linked. The women had several things in common. Each had left home voluntarily, or appeared to have. Each had told a family member she had accepted a short-term caregiver job, typically overnight residential care work, that paid cash weekly. Several had mentioned the company name Midwest Home Resource Group. 2 had mentioned a recruiter they had met briefly, in person, at a gas station or a diner or a parking lot. 1 had texted her mother a photo of a pay stub, the same format Dana Marsh had received by fax, before going quiet. None of the 23 had returned home. 11 had stopped responding to texts or calls within 72 hours of leaving. The others went quiet within 2 weeks. The pay stubs were recruitment tools. They were sent to families as proof of legitimate employment, to explain the women's absence, to buy time. Doyle elevated the case to a joint task force the same afternoon. The FBI Omaha field office coordinated with Homeland Security Investigations, the Nebraska State Patrol, and law enforcement counterparts in Iowa, Kansas, and Missouri. The joint team was assigned a federal task force number and given a working designation, Operation Blackline. The duplex on Calder Court became the primary surveillance target. What's most surprising about this stage of the investigation isn't the scale, it's how invisible it all was. The duplex looked, from the street, like any other rental property on the block. No unusual traffic, no noise complaints, no deliveries that stood out. The only anomaly was the electrical draw, sitting in the public utility grid for months before anyone thought to pull it. The joint team obtained a warrant for utility records. The Calder Court duplex had consumed 3 times the electrical power of any comparable unit on its block since the month it was occupied. The consistent load suggested continuous mechanical operation, HVAC systems, industrial lighting, or ventilation equipment running around the clock. Not consistent with 2 residential tenants. Consistent with a managed interior environment. surveillance was established. Two unmarked vehicles positioned on parallel streets with camera angles covering both the front entry and the alley entrance. License plate readers were installed on both approaches. The team settled in. Here is where the investigation hit its first serious obstacle. 3 weeks into surveillance, the duplex showed almost no external activity. Two individuals entered through the front door in the mornings, always in the same sequence. One arrived first, one arrived 40 minutes later. Both wore plain clothing and carried nothing conspicuous. A dark gray minivan registered to a rental agency parked in the alley on alternating days. No packages were observed being moved in or out. No women were observed entering or leaving the building. The team had a paper trail. They had a utility anomaly. They had 23 missing person cases connected to a company linked to this address. But they did not have direct observation of anything criminal occurring inside the building. Without that, a warrant for entry would be difficult to sustain. The investigation needed a thread it could pull from outside the building. Doyle's financial crimes background produced the thread. The business checking account for Midwest Home Resource Group had made outgoing transfers to 17 different individuals over a 4-month period. The transfers were small, between $300 and $800 each, and irregular in timing. The recipients were distributed across Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, and Missouri. Each transfer was labeled in the account memo field as referral compensation. Referral compensation. 17 people had been paid in small amounts for referrals. Doyle's team identified 8 of the 17 individuals through bank account registration data. Federal investigators contacted each one. 4 declined to cooperate. 3 said they had referred someone they knew, a neighbor, a coworker, a cousin, to a caregiver job they had heard about through a third party. 1 said he had been paid in cash at a gas station and had given a phone number to a young woman at a bar in Topeka who was looking for work. Recruiters. Not the operators of the duplex, the outer layer. Individuals who had been paid small fees to pass contact information and job descriptions to young women in their communities. The most surprising part, none of the referral sources appeared to know what they were feeding. Their own understanding of the job matched the victims. Short-term residential care work, cash pay, a company called Midwest Home Resource Group. 2 of them had been told the company was in the process of licensing with the state and was using federal employment verification documents in the interim, which explained the pay stubs. The recruiters were themselves deceived. They were the outer shell of a deception engineered to look mundane from every angle. Legitimate to the women who took the jobs, legitimate to the families who received the stubs, legitimate to the community contacts who made the referrals. Most people assume trafficking operations announce themselves through obvious signs: coercion on the street, visible movement, public exposure. The evidence in this case tells a different story. The Calder Court operation had run for nearly 4 months by embedding itself in the aesthetic of legitimate care work recruitment. It used real institutional formats, federal EINs, pay stubs, referral networks, as camouflage. Not one person who touched the outer layer of the operation saw anything that looked wrong. The referral network also gave the investigators something else, a timeline. Cross-referencing the transfer dates against the missing person report dates produced a match pattern. Each cluster of outgoing referral payments preceded a cluster of missing person filings by approximately 2 to 3 weeks. The recruitment cycle appeared to run in batches. The most recent batch of transfers had occurred 9 days before the surveillance operation began. This was significant. It meant a new recruitment cycle was underway or recently completed. Put yourself in Doyle's position for a moment. You have a surveillance operation on a building you cannot enter. You have evidence that another recruitment batch just went out. You do not know how many women are inside. You do not know the condition of the women already there. Every day the operation continues. The possibility increases that something irreversible occurs before the entry team breaches. The decision to accelerate the timeline came from above. The Joint Task Force presented its evidentiary package to the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Nebraska in late October 2025. The package included the stolen EIN documentation, the financial records of Midwest Home Resource Group, the license plate reader data from the alley, the utility anomaly, the missing person cross-reference, and the referral payment timeline. The United States Attorney's Office authorized a federal criminal complaint under Title 18, the relevant statutes covering forced labor, document fraud, and conspiracy. Arrest warrants were issued for two primary suspects: the individual identified as the operational manager of the Calder Court site, referred to in the federal complaint as Subject 1, and the individual identified as the administrative organizer of Midwest Home Resource Group, referred to as Subject 2. Both subjects had been visually identified through surveillance and matched to identities connected to the shell company's registration paperwork. Subject 1 was a 41-year-old man who had entered the duplex daily for the duration of the surveillance period. Subject 2 was a 34-year-old woman whose name appeared on the original LLC registration in Delaware and whose bank accounts had executed all outgoing referral transfers. Neither had a prior federal conviction. Subject 2 had a dismissed fraud charge from a state court in Missouri 7 years earlier involving a fictitious business filing. The charge had been dropped on a procedural deficiency. No prison time. The entry plan was structured for simultaneous breach of both units of the duplex, front and rear, at a time when operational activity would be minimal and the risk of rapid evidence destruction lowest. The planning team reviewed the building's structure against county property records and utility layout documentation. The records were 11 years old. Here is where the investigation hit its second serious obstacle, and it nearly altered the entire operation. 48 hours before the scheduled breach, a member of the surveillance team ran an updated building permit query through the county record system. A permit had been pulled on the property 14 months earlier, 2 months before Midwest Home Resource Group had taken occupancy for interior renovation work. The permit listed no contractor of record. The renovation permit suggested structural changes to the interior that were not reflected in the building's 11-year-old plans. Specifically, a notation referenced a utility and storage partition in the basement level. The entry team's tactical plan had not accounted for a partitioned basement. The team leader, referred to in the operation record as Agent Calloway, spent 6 hours revising the breach plan with his tactical coordinator. The rear entry approach was modified. A secondary team was added specifically for basement clearance. The breach timeline was extended by 4 minutes to allow for coordinated stacking at a second internal choke point. What no one knew, going into the entry, was exactly what the partition looked like or how it was secured. The breach was rescheduled for November 14, 2025, 4:11 a.m. The night before the operation, the surveillance team logged one departure from the duplex at 11:47 p.m. Subject 1 left through the front door, got into the dark gray minivan in the alley, and drove north. He did not return. This created an immediate problem. The arrest warrants required simultaneous apprehension of both subjects, ideally at the moment of breach. Subject 1 had left the primary location. His phone's last known ping, tracked through a lawfully obtained location order, placed him at an extended stay motel 12 miles north of Calder Court. A secondary arrest team was detached from the operation and repositioned to the motel. They would wait for the signal from the primary breach team and move simultaneously. Subject 2 remained inside the duplex. Her vehicle was in the alley. No other activity was observed through the night. At 4:00 a.m., the primary entry team assembled in the alley and on the front approach. 22 agents and officers total. FBI and HSI, with Nebraska State Patrol uniformed officers providing perimeter containment. 2 tactical medics were staged at the alley mouth. A mobile medical coordination unit was parked 4 blocks away, staffed by emergency personnel briefed on the possibility of a large number of individuals requiring immediate evaluation. At 4:11 a.m., the radio clicked twice. The rear team hit the kitchen door. Steel frame, exterior grade deadbolt. The frame held for 2 strikes before the lock assembly pulled through the jamb. 3 seconds total. The front team breached simultaneously through a modified entry at the living room window, a tactical adjustment from the original door frame plan, based on a last-hour structural assessment. The ground floor of the duplex was clear. A kitchen. A dining area converted to an administrative workspace, with a folding table covered in printed documents, a laptop, 2 prepaid phones, and a filing box. No individuals. The documents would later be logged as containing printed referral records, blank pay stub templates, and handwritten contact lists covering dozens of names and phone numbers across 4 states. Subject 2 was located in an upstairs bedroom. She did not resist. She was placed under arrest at 4:14 a.m. and removed from the building. The basement stairwell was located at the rear of the kitchen. The door was unlocked. At the base of the stairs, the team encountered concrete flooring, unfinished, with a utility area to the left containing the HVAC and electrical panel. To the right, the basement extended approximately 20 feet. But the original floor plan had shown the basement running 38 feet. 18 feet of space was hidden behind a drywall partition. The partition had been constructed from standard half-inch drywall, painted to match the basement walls, and was indistinguishable at a glance from a structural wall. There was no door frame, no visible seam at eye level. There were 6 screws, 3-inch construction screws, evenly spaced along the left edge of the panel, driven from the outside, not from the inside. Agent Calloway's secondary team lead, Officer Brandt, applied the Halligan bar to the lower left corner of the panel. 2 strikes. The drywall cracked along a vertical seam that had been concealed under paint. A 3rd strike and the panel came free, rotating outward on the right side where it had been secured to a framing stud with adhesive. The flashlight beam entered the room before anyone did. The room was approximately 18 feet by 22 feet. It had been fitted with folding cots arranged in 2 rows. Ventilation came from a single HVAC duct running overhead. The electrical draw that had registered on the utility records was accounted for by the duct, an industrial dehumidifier running in the corner, and a bank of overhead fluorescent lights. 20 women, all alive. The youngest, according to intake documentation completed later that morning at the University of Nebraska Medical Center, was 22 years old. She had been reported missing from a small town in eastern Kansas by her mother, 79 days earlier. The oldest was 27. She had been reported missing from a town in southern Iowa by her fiancé, who had driven to Omaha twice to walk the streets himself looking for her, not knowing how close he had come. All 20 were transported by the mobile medical unit to the staging hospital for immediate evaluation. Federal victim advocates were on site before the first van arrived. The secondary arrest team reached Subject 1 at the extended stay motel at 4:14 a.m., the same minute Subject 2 was removed from the duplex. He was taken into custody without incident. Here is the part that doesn't make sense on the surface. Subject 1 and Subject 2 had, between them, run this operation for nearly 4 months without any internal failure. No one called for help. No one escaped. No contact with the outside world was evidenced in the women's possession. The operation had held, logistically, almost perfectly. And it came down to a fax. Sent, apparently by the administrative assistant of one of the referral network participants, to the wrong fax number, the real Heartland staffing solutions. An administrative error at the periphery of the network by someone who probably never set foot near Calder Court. Here's what stands out. The system did not fail these women early. It failed them repeatedly. 23 missing person reports filed across 4 jurisdictions over 4 months, and the connection was not made until a payroll clerk in a completely different industry flagged a document anomaly. The missing persons infrastructure in the Central Plains had the data. It did not have the cross-referencing mechanism to see it as a pattern until a federal analyst ran the query manually under a task force authorization that required a fax, a fraud complaint, and a lucky misdial to initiate. That is not a criticism of any individual law enforcement officer. It is an observation about infrastructure. The administrative workspace recovered from the duplex's ground floor contained, among other documents, a printed list of 47 names, phone numbers, and town names, none of which corresponded to the 20 women recovered from the basement. Investigators assessed this list as a prospective recruitment target list for a subsequent cycle. Based on the referral payment timeline analysis, that cycle would have launched within 2 to 3 weeks of the date of the breach. The network's reach was larger than the duplex itself. Federal warrants served in the days following the breach identified 3 storage units rented under related shell entities, containing additional administrative materials, blank document stock, and financial records suggesting that the referral payment system had been operating across a broader geographic area than the 4-state pattern initially identified. Records indicated contact with referral sources in 2 additional states, though no additional women in those states had yet been reported missing as of the date of the warrant execution. What this meant, structurally, was that the Calder Court operation may have been one node in a larger network, or the precursor to an expansion. The federal indictment addressed the known criminal activity. The indictment could not address what had not yet happened. Subject 1 and Subject 2 were each charged with conspiracy to commit forced labor, document fraud, and identity theft under federal statute. Pre-sentencing investigation reports prepared by the United States Probation Office were submitted to the district court judge assigned to the case. Sentencing proceedings were initiated in the first half of 2026. Subject 2, the administrative organizer, received a federal sentence of 14 years in a federal correctional institution. Subject 1, the site operations manager, received a sentence of 17 years. Both sentences carried mandatory minimum terms for the conspiracy conviction. Neither defendant entered a cooperation agreement. Of the 17 individuals who received referral payments, 8 were identified. Of those 8, 3 were charged with lesser federal offenses, specifically participation in a scheme to defraud through false document distribution, and entered plea agreements. The remaining 5 were not prosecuted on the available evidence. The 9 unidentified referral recipients were not located. The prepaid phone network used to coordinate recruiter contacts, 17 devices identified across the case, was reconstructed from cell tower records and bank payment data. 11 of the 17 phones had been active during the operation. 6 had never been activated and were recovered from the administrative storage at the duplex, still in packaging. The 11 active devices had been purchased at retail locations across 3 states over a 6-month period. All were registered to fictitious identities. All were inactive by the time the case went to indictment. The Delaware-registered LLC, Midwest Home Resource Group, was administratively dissolved by the Delaware Division of Corporations following notification from the federal court. Its bank account, which had held a balance of $11,400 at the time of the arrest, was seized and forfeited. The broader financial flow, the revenue that had funded the operation itself, was not fully recovered. Federal financial investigators traced outgoing transfers from 2 secondary accounts associated with Subject 1, totaling approximately $280,000 over the 10-month period preceding the arrest. Of that amount, $43,000 was seized. The remainder had moved through a series of cash withdrawals and money order purchases that could not be fully reconstructed. $237,000 was never recovered. The 47 names on the prospective recruitment list were individually contacted by FBI and HSI victim advocates in the weeks following the breach. All 47 were located and interviewed. None had been approached by the network. It is not possible to determine, from available records, whether those 47 women would have been targeted in the next recruitment cycle or whether the list represented research at an earlier stage of planning. Heartland Staffing Solutions, the company whose EIN was used to produce the fraudulent pay stubs, was notified by the U.S. Attorney's Office of the identity theft and the resolution of the case. The company's legal department filed a civil complaint against the estate of the Midwest Home Resource Group, LLC. There are no assets to recover. The woman who had been reported missing from eastern Kansas was discharged from the University of Nebraska Medical Center 5 days after the breach. Her mother drove from Emporia to Omaha to bring her home. They had not spoken in 79 days. The woman's fiancé, the one who had driven to Omaha twice to search on foot, was reached by phone by an FBI victim advocate at 4:51 a.m. on the morning of the breach, 40 minutes after the first flashlight beam entered the basement room. The advocate confirmed that his fiancée had been located and was receiving medical care. He asked, according to the advocate's case notes, whether she was going to be okay. The advocate told him that she was alive. That is what was known with certainty at 4:51 a.m. on November 14, 2025. Will operations like this, shell companies, stolen EINs, rural recruiter networks, partitioned basements, be replicated? Comment your answer. The infrastructure for this kind of operation requires no specialized equipment and minimal capital. A rental property, a Delaware LLC, a stolen federal tax number, and a network of low-paid community contacts who themselves do not understand what they are facilitating. The barrier to replication is not technical. It has never been technical. The duplex on Calder Court has since been re-rented by the property management company. The drywall panel was removed by a building contractor the following week. The space it had enclosed returned to the basement's original floor plan. The payroll clerk, Dana Marsh, returned to work the Monday after the breach. She did not know the operation had concluded or what had been found until a federal victim advocate called to tell her. The advocate was not required to make that call. She made it anyway. Marsh processed payroll that morning. She flagged 2 unrelated discrepancies in submitted documentation. She filed the reports through the standard compliance channel and went home at 5 o'clock. The network is dismantled. The 47 names on that list are safe, for now. The referral structure that built the network, the quiet community contacts, the gas station conversations, the small payments that looked like honest work, those pathways still exist in the same towns where they were first used. The demand that built Calder Court has not been indicted. It has no sentence.